you follow the advice that every financial person would tell you on the internet, in real life, through books that have been sort of well read, and they tell you to put away for a long, long period of time. Well, the IRA forces you to do that, because if you're investing in this 401k or IRA and you're 35 years old, you also just put money into an account that you can't access without a penalty until you're 59 and a half. So we're talking another 25, 35 years, 25, 30 years that you can't access this money. So why not go for something that's a longer term hold?
We're kind of trained to put money into these vehicles that we can't touch for a long time. Some people say that's wrong, that you shouldn't, we're not teaching people the right thing to have 401ks or IRAs. It's not necessarily a bad idea. It's what is happening within those accounts that I think is maybe a little bit. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today, I'm here with Henry Yoshida. Henry is the CEO and co-founder of Rocket Dollar, a web platform that lets people invest tax-advantaged retirement monies into private and alternative investments. So, Henry, like I said, I'm going to stop there on the bio, because it always sounds much, much better to let you tell your story than to me try and read it off these off the bio sheet. So first, though, thank you for coming on the show today. Thanks for taking the time out. I appreciate it. I'm very excited for the conversation today.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Well, let's start. Let's hear about you. Let's hear about your background, and then we'll kind of go in from there.
Sure. I think, like a lot of entrepreneurs, I think there's two paths: people who've always been an entrepreneur, and then people who intended to go into the corporate world, like myself. I did that. So I worked at Big Bad Merrill Lynch, which ended up becoming a part of Bank of America for 10 years. And while I was there, I think I was one of the corporate employees who was good enough to keep going in that side of my life if I wanted to. But I was just curious enough, or cynical enough, probably is a better term, to kind of recognize, when there were things that the big companies weren't focusing on. That's what led me down a different path in becoming an entrepreneur, specifically in the field of technologies and products or services as well, in the retirement account or tax advantage account space. So as you mentioned, Jason, IRAs, 401ks, and I think when people just ask me generally, 25 years in financial services, but really 12 of those were in the corporate world, and the last 12 and a half have now been sort of as an entrepreneur across 3 businesses. And my current one, Rocket Dollar, is an IRA platform that lets people take their IRAs and old 401k money, keep the tax treatments, like we all know in an IRA type of account, but instead of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, Wall Street type investments, they can make private and alternative investments. So that could be anything from real estate to private equity, private venture, invest directly as an angel into a company or a business, or cryptocurrencies on the way far into the spectrum from just a volatility standpoint. And that's what we do at Rocket Dollar.
That's very cool. So talk a little bit about, maybe you said, just cynical enough to leave the corporate world. Tell me a bit about that. Tell me what maybe you didn't like about that kind of sent you out on your own. Sometimes I think there's just that entrepreneurial bug, but I have found from a few other people in the financial services space that have been on the podcast that there tends to be some things that maybe they didn't like about how it was handled, whether it's Merrill Lynch or just that industry in general.
Yeah, I think in my side, I think I really, I had nothing against what the company was trying to achieve from an overall perspective. I mean, they did what they did. They had their mandates and protocols for us. When I say the cynical, I think that's a combination of cynical and curious. But pretty early in my stint in the corporate world, the way that I survived and thrived in my particular program, which was as a financial advisor, was I started working with small business owners primarily. So on the one side, I had their account as a small business owner, but then the other half of my business was, since they were the owner of this very small business, I helped them set up a 401k plan for their employees, whether that was 5 people, 10 people, 15. And those are the accounts I started with. And then as I went through my 10 years at Merrill Lynch, those companies, the small and medium-sized businesses, became 100 employees, 300 employees, 1,000 employees, 5,000 employees, to true mid-size employers. But what I learned in the cynical / curious combination was that there wasn't a real product that supported non-Fortune 500, Fortune 2000 type of companies, or Russell 2000 type companies, they were just using the same products, but for much smaller companies. So when I say Russell 2000 or S&P 500, the 401k systems and providers for a company with 65,000 employees, 15,000 international, but based in the US or paid through the US, and 50,000 actually in the US, were the same systems that they would use for a 25-person 401k plan that was an HVAC air conditioner repair company in the Midwest of the United States. So that kind of just gave me this sort of light bulb moment that, well, if someone could create a product that's more designed for that right size company, and that's sort of the opportunity that I pursued. So, that to your point and to your community's point, it kind of became my why. I guess I thought to myself that, hey, I could take this chance at this point in my life, career. It was pre-marriage, pre-kids. I could take this chance to try to make a bigger impact and do something. If it didn't work out, well, it was just me. I didn't really need a safety net, and quite frankly, I could probably just go get hired again. Maybe not at Merrill because I left them, but there's 5 or 6 or 7 or 27 competitors hired me back. If I went away for a year and said it didn't work out, I want to go back and kind of be the man again, or work for the man.
Yeah, you have a in demand skill set, so that's that's actually I mean, this maybe not as relevant to this topic on here, but that's an interesting thing to touch on, in that there's a lot of limiting beliefs people might have when they want to go out and start a business, be an entrepreneur, invest, whatever it is that fear that might hold them back. And I think you very succinctly just kind of summed up maybe why it was a good time for you, in terms of not a lot of people depending on you, that sort of thing. But I think one of the things that people miss a lot of times is that, like, what's the worst case, right? Like, if you go out and you try something and it doesn't work out, in your case, it's like, oh, I'm back to being a financial advisor. Like, that's not a terrible outcome. It's not, and I think that's the case for a lot of people. It's like, you either have a good career or skill set that you can fall back on if being an entrepreneur, starting a business did happen to not work out. You also, in the opposite is kind of true. Like, if you're in a job that you don't like, you're unhappy, and you're like, I might try out this entrepreneur thing. Well, again, the worst thing that happens is you fall back into a job that you don't like, I guess, but you were already there. So it's kind of, I think one of those limiting beliefs that, with the people that I've been fortunate enough to talk to on this podcast, and it's just a thing that I've noticed. It's like, well, okay, if it didn't work, it didn't work. That's okay. Like, that's not the worst thing that can happen in life.
I mean, I think the better thing is you look back and you say you tried. I mean, one of my business heroes, and I've read a lot of books about his life. I mean, oddly enough, he actually didn't write any of them. People have chronicled his life because it's been so amazingly successful. But Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, he had a big corporate job on Wall Street. He was a banker for D.E. Shaw. He was high ranking at the time, making what would be the equivalent of a 7-figure salary, right? But he decided to leave and do that. And the D.E. Shaw himself, the chairman and namesake of the firm, actually said, well, why would you do that? You have a great gig going here. I mean, you're a superstar here. You're making $1 million a year in salary. I mean, this wasn't just a regular job. This was an amazing corporate job. And his answer to him was that, the thing is that I can come back and do this. But the one thing is that when I'm sitting by myself or at 80 years old, I would look back and say that I never tried if I didn't take this chance. And remember, the original idea was to literally go and sell books on this thing called the internet that not a lot of people knew about. I mean, it wasn't the Amazon that we know today. That's, there's probably a greater than 50% chance it's going to end up leaving a package at your door or mine in the time that we're actually on this call right now. And true to form, I am expecting a air popcorn maker right now, so it should show up in the next couple hours.
Are you planning a remodel or construction project? Overwhelmed by the process? Over budget? Extended timelines? Strained relationships? We are all too familiar. At Lark Construction Services, we help homeowners and business owners take control of their construction journey. from reviewing bids and contracts to catching red flags before they become costly mistakes. Our Clarity Audit is a one-on-one expert review of your plans, estimates, or current progress, giving you the peace of mind and a defined action plan to move forward with confidence. Don't let confusion lead to costly errors. Visit larkconstruction.com and schedule your free call today. Lark Construction Services, saving you time, money, and stress.
It'll be here any minute. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure probably, my wife is ordering something right now if it's not showing up. So we do a lot of shopping through Amazon. And I mean, that's really it's a fabulous point. And I also, one of the things that makes me think about is the ceiling, right? So sure, you may have that great job. You may have something that feels very safe, and you might be making good money and all of that. But, okay, if Jeff Bezos was making $1 million a year at the job he had now, that's fantastic. But that's not being, whatever place he is now, the ex richest man in the world, and having created a company that impacts, likely millions of people on a day-to-day basis. So it's just, I think that we have a tendency to be very risk averse, and I think that the point of what we're talking about here is, like, first of all, like, what if the risk works out? Second of all, like, what is the actual worst case scenario? Like, the worst case scenario is usually you're just where you are right now, which is okay.
Well, maybe the decision to go a different route in your life, whether that's personal, career, business, whatever that may be, maybe you need to establish the why you're making that. But, I think the basis behind it, what needs to be behind that, is you need to know your worth as well, which is that, hey, I could leave this realm, but I could come back. I mean, at the end of the day, if you got the chairman of an investment bank trying to convince you not to leave, and you're, the firm, I think that's a pretty good sign that you're good enough to where if you completely failed at this business venture, in his case, that's what he wanted to do, and have to come back, wouldn't any number of the competitors, and probably even the company you left, accept you back because you knew your worth, you knew you were good enough, you can just come back. I mean, maybe you take a title step back, maybe you missed out on a couple of years of merit-based raises, but in his case, he traded what would have been considered like a top 1%er income / career track that most people in America would have envied at the time he was doing this in the 90s, to then now being, let's say, the top 5 wealthiest people in the history of civilization. And then literally creating a company that a 2-year-old.
Right. Yeah, it's everybody knows that symbol. You don't even have to have the word. People know that symbol. Like that is, that's creating something. That truly is creating something.
So, the why is maybe what, what helps you make that change, but the worth is what gives you that confidence, and maybe sort of the, I guess, plan B, C, D, and E, if it doesn't work out, but at least, you tried, and you can look back when you're 80 and say you tried.
Yeah. No, I love it. Well, we could talk a lot about Jeff Bezos, but let's talk about you a bit more, and just kind of, so tell it, your idea here, or not idea, it's but Rocket Dollar, the idea is that people can invest through tax advantage accounts into alternative investments. So is it ultimately, we're talking about like a self-directed IRA? Is it or just in that category? How would you further define it for people?
So the technical term, although not very great, is self-directed IRA. So that kind of denotes IRAs where the IRA account holder can invest in things that are not publicly registered, so things that aren't stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, and that's what Rocket Dollar does. Now that industry, this type of account existed before I started Rocket Dollar in 2018, but it didn't exist in a way where it was very well known. Like, it wasn't easy to access. In other words, I felt like when I looked at the marketplace of self-directed providers, it was the third cousin of the redheaded stepchild of financial services. So it was even beyond, let's say, the redheaded stepchild of financial services. Um, and it didn't, the existing players out there didn't do anything to, I think, try to be somewhat similar in any way, shape, or form to the big brokerage houses. So, your Fidelities, your Vanguard, your Charles Schwab's were, at this point, even in 2018, obviously, people expected to be able to go to an online website and fill out and give personal information and have an account number established. And that didn't exist in the self-directed. So, my thinking was that, hey, my background is in this space. I came from the more traditional incumbent financial services, and I did a lot of work in consulting with these big brokerages. So if I can make the customer experience from at least some components mirror what most investors are used to, then it could actually open this market up to more people. That was kind of the thinking of Rocket Dollar. So we were a technology first platform. The first thing that we did wasn't deciding how we were going to lay out our paperwork forms that we were going to mail to people. It was actually purchasing the domain itself and analyzing that there was nothing else that kind of tracked similar in that space, for the terms rocket or dollar, and really establishing an online presence and making it an experience that was very similar to opening an account at your Fidelity, Schwab's, or maybe even more recently, SoFi's and Robinhood's now for a younger and newer generation of investors. And that was the genesis. And then the idea of the market positioning was that, well, there's a big opportunity for someone to come in because of the now 35 to 36 trillion dollars held in U.S. retirement accounts. Still 99% of that money is held in publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, which are largely represented by the top 500 largest companies, which are now overweighted towards the top 7 of those 500 companies. So in other words, we're a country that is largely invested in the same 7 to 10 companies for the most part, and everything else is not invested in through these retirement dollars because it's hard. They didn't know they can. They couldn't find a provider. It was easy to open an account. It could be a number of reasons. And so that was the genesis for, why starting the company, why me, to do it.
Well, I mean, you're kind of like the Robin Hood of the self-directed IRA space then, because I think that is, you mentioned that now, your normal brokerage accounts and things like that, people want to have it be, easy to use technology. I don't really feel like that was so much the case before Robinhood came along. Like, I think that changed a lot of the way that people use their brokerage accounts there, or at least in my experience, it did change a lot of how it was. Even the self-directed space is still, like you said, here's a form, print out the form, sign the form, scan it, send it back. I mean, there is a lot of what seems like antiquated practices there. Let's talk a little bit about, kind of alternative investments and maybe why you chose that to focus on. I mean, what was after, because Merrill Lynch isn't going to have that as an option. So what made you want to build your platform around those types of investments?
I thought that if I was looking at a particular market segment, so I'll use kind of an industry term here, they call it mass affluent. So that's the target audience that most financial companies or most maybe not super high end luxury, but higher end brands want. So mass affluent could be defined in a number of ways, but to consumer products, it might be defined as household incomes of 80,000 or 100,000 or more. These are household incomes, right? So you think of the brands that really want to penetrate that market and make sure that they're known: Target, Costco, Southwest Airlines, Marriott, Nordstrom, and so forth, right? I mean, these are mainstream brands, but they're not discount super inexpensive brands either. And they cater to that market. In financial services, mass affluent typically refers to someone who has 250,000 of investable assets or more. So not net worth, but just overall accumulated accounts that they can put into investments. And in that world, in financial services, these people have investments. But again, I just mentioned that it's very, very weighted towards large cap United States, and more recently in the last 10 years, technology large cap companies, because whatever funds they invest in, those are the largest components of the S&P 500 right now. So for me, looking at alternative investments are a thing that were typically only invested in by the family offices of someone like a Jeff Bezos, or institutions, endowment funds. And these are the people that were buying, buildings, apartment complexes, big swaths of land, becoming big limited partner holders or shareholders inside of a private equity or private venture fund, right? It wasn't accessible by the mass affluent and so forth. So, what's the reason for that? Well, one of the reasons is that Americans have a large part of their long-term investable monies put inside of these IRA and retirement accounts, of which the industry is dominated by providers and companies that, as you mentioned earlier, only allow you to invest in publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds because that's what their systems are capable of, or they produce products that are packages of stocks. So mutual funds, for example, right? So Fidelity, as an example, is not just a gigantic holder and provider of IRA and brokerage accounts to people. They're also one of the top 5 largest creators of mutual index funds that are packages of these stocks. So of course they're going to want to sell their packaged product to that. And I go back and I use these big company analogies, right? But Costco sells a lot of outside brands. 40% of their store is their own Kirkland signature privately. Trader Joe's sells some outside brands, but 85% of the things in their store are actually manufactured by themselves, right? So they don't want to let all these outside companies in. And financial services, in a slightly different way, doesn't operate that differently from those types of companies, right? They want to make sure that their customers purchase things that they also produce on the other side of the house. Their mutual funds, their products, their packages, their embedded fee systems and trading protocols for people buying publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And I just think to myself that, hey, there's a real market out there for these private investments, because one, anyone who has a private investment that they're trying to sell is always looking for capital. And for the longest time, they were only accessing a very small number of large dollar denomination institutions. Well, so if someone can come in and really open up a market where there's $36 trillion of money that's actually held in tax-friendly accounts for long-term holding periods, I mean, that's actually a win for anyone who's in the private investment space as a creator of these products or a seller of these products, as well as an investor to diversify beyond, the S&P 7 stocks, for example. So, I just kind of look at it as a step back and think about like where an opportunity may be. And we're not a gigantic player by any means, but we did cross recently the $11.5 billion in customer assets mark. So we're not small either. And there's a lot of people that have unlocked their retirement accounts to go into private investments, everything from real estate direct into companies, become an LP in a private equity or private venture fund, and even cryptocurrencies and digital assets.
Yeah, that the use of retirement funds for alternative assets, it makes so much more sense in sense of like as someone who has raised capital for real estate syndications, like one of the questions or concerns that potential investors will have is the liquidity of the investment. And it's like, well, no, this is, this real estate is going to be held for 5, 7, maybe longer years, or you're investing in a company, that company's likely to be around for a long-term hold, versus the, liquidity of the stock market. It almost doesn't make sense to put your non-liquid funds from a retirement account into a liquid asset, like, or at least all of them. You would almost want to take your non-liquid assets or investments and put them in your retirement accounts, and vice versa. Anything that you're going to have kind of outside of that would make sense to be then in, stocks, bonds, and mutual funds.
Well, in your case too, if it's a real estate syndication, right? So the idea is that the overall property is a multi-year time period hold, but in between you're kicking off income, to the holders. So a lot of these people, if they're doing these types of investments, actually don't really want that income. They don't need that added to their day job income, right? That's just now more of a tax drag. So, I tell people that and this is a reason why the biggest investors in alternative and private investments right now are think about it, these endowments, municipal pension plans, it's because they have really good tax treatment and a super long time horizon. Now, the closest thing that a mass affluent individual American investor has to those characteristics are actually their 401k and their IRAs. So if you're 35 years old and you put 10% of your $100,000 income into your 401k, right, which every financial advisor in America would say that that's the good rule of thumb. That's the richest man in Babylon, put away a dime for every dollar that you earn. And you'll sustain yourself with an income stream and your money will start to work for you. So you follow the advice that every financial person would tell you on the internet, in real life, through books that have been sort of well read. And they tell you to put away for a long, long period of time. Well, the IRA forces you to do that because if you're investing in this 401k or IRA and you're 35 years old, you also just put money into an account that you can't access without a penalty until you're 59 and a half. So we're talking another, 25, 35 years. 25, 30 years that you can't access this money. So why not go for something that's a longer term hold? And I think that's where another thing it aligns. So great tax treatment, long-term hold. That's what institutions and endowments have. And that's the reason why they're buying into infrastructure projects, or some sort of, iconic building in Manhattan, for example, because they expect to hold the investment for 50 years and kicking off income throughout that they don't really need, because they would just pay taxes on it if they had it in a taxable account and so forth. You could just let it accumulate. And once you accumulate enough capital, go double down on it on the next syndication, for example, from large capital, as an example. That's what our customers do.
Yeah. And it's funny that, I'm sure there's reasons why it's not known to do this, but it's like, once you kind of figure that out, it makes so much sense. Like it's like, why do I, we're kind of trained to put money into these vehicles that we can't touch for a long time. I don't think that, some people say that's wrong, that you shouldn't, we're not teaching people the right thing to have 401ks or IRAs. It's not necessarily a bad idea. It's what is happening within those accounts that I think is maybe a little bit misguided, and probably not setting people up as well as they possibly could be for the long hold. So it's just, I love the concept. I think it's, and having it be technology based, and therefore user friendly, I would imagine has a lot of,
people still have to find their private deals. So in our case, we are really the Rocket Dollar is a pure IRA platform. So we ourselves, we don't have another side of the house that creates or syndicates investments. So really people come to us, open the account. We maintain the structure of an IRA, but that individual is now charged with finding their own private deal. So that's evaluating, let's say, some syndication offering from you in the Southern California area, if that's where you do your business, or where I'm at in Central Texas, or just something else altogether. So what we find is that people look at those opportunities, and this mass affluent investor, I mentioned, typically defined informally as 250,000 investable assets. Well, what if they find that 250,000 of it's actually just in mutual funds inside of a 401k IRA and a $20,000 brokerage account, and all of them are invested in large cap funds or a broad market S&P 500 index fund? Well, I can tell you right now that you currently own 7.5% of your entire $250,000 portfolio is in NVIDIA. Another 6% is in Microsoft. 5% is going to be in Alphabet, the parent company of Google. And so forth. And when you add up those top 7, you're going to find that you have 35% of your money in 7 tech companies.
That is probably an entire another rabbit hole we could go down, because I think there's a lot to that. I think, in the sense that people think they are diversified in those instances, but you in fact you just own a very large.
And that's done well for people. It has proven to generate great returns. But this is just a sense that, what we find our customers doing is that they decide that they want to go do a deal that they've sourced on their own, a real estate syndication, and they like it because it's a syndication that's going to purchase a 125 unit apartment complex, 50 miles away from where they live. So to them, it's a tangible investment completely separate from a chip company like Nvidia or a technology company like Microsoft. Um, and it generates income. So if you own it inside of an IRA account at Rocket Dollar, then that income just gets redeposited into the account, and then accumulates as cash. And then, after a certain amount of time, you may have generated enough income that sits in cash in the account to go do the next syndication. And this time, instead of an apartment complex 50 miles away from where you live in Southern California, you might go into a commercial office building in a downtown area of a Midwest city, that's going through a revitalization, for example, something like that. So, I've seen it all. I mean, we have roughly 10,000 different investments registered across our platform. So we kind of get a sense of different things that people are doing and what sectors, industries, and then we talk to the customers as well. Like even to this day, I actually leave my phones on, quite a bit, and I just take inbound calls, and gives me a chance to talk to prospective customers, existing customers, and that's how I sort of like learn and stay in touch with the pulse of what our customers are doing.
I would imagine that is probably a good deal sourcing for you if you want, hearing about what people are investing in and what's performing well, and seeing that. But if I'm understanding correctly, so you're not making investment advisements. You're not managing the investments for people. This is a platform.
Yeah, we just chose to do that. It allows us to be a little bit more pure play. So we don't endorse. We have a partners page, but that's mostly to give people an idea of that. Hey, you have an account with us. You probably came to us because you had one particular deal that you had sourced on your own, but now you decided that you want to move over more funds from a traditional IRA account into big brokerage house and do others. So these are just for information purposes. And we've had a number of customers go into deals on this platform, that platform. Usually these will be the more online based ones as well, and not specific to like one deal, but more of a platform in a certain asset class within the private and alternative space. So, but we have no monetary relationship with any of them because, quite frankly, we don't manage or source or diligence those funds. That's on the customer to do that. We just, we're in the business of maintaining your account as an IRA for tax and reporting purposes, and then we tell our customers that it's their responsibility to go be the best investor they can be.
Yeah. I like that model. I think it keeps some of the maybe conflict of interest out of it by not being the investment advisor. I think I also just like, I think people have to take some ownership of their own financial future and their investments and things like that. And I think the traditional model of IRAs and 401ks kind of completely takes it out of your hand. It's just, okay, I put some money in, someone else figures out what to do with it. And that person, in a lot of instances, if the program is through your employer, you don't even know who that person was. You didn't pick them. You're truly just kind of at the mercy of whoever that is and whatever performance that may be. So taking some ownership of it yourself, I think makes all the sense in the world.
I mean, that is one thing, right? So the tried and true financial advice, and this is actually, I agree, this is the way to start, but you get in the savings habit of putting away a dime or more of every dollar that you earn. But usually the second part of that is just kind of put it in something and don't worry about it, and it'll be fine over the next 20, 30 years. And maybe that was the case in the past. Maybe it could still be the case in the future. But, right now, just, when you look, it is generally concentrated, and you are kind of at the whims of, I wouldn't say the overall market, but the people, the companies and organizations who dominate the market. And when I say dominate, I mean from the actual companies themselves, and then the brokerage houses who actually also quasi control the voting rights of those companies as well. So, at the end of the day, I talked about the largest 7 companies now being overly held, probably unbeknownst to a lot of average American investors. But those same companies, the largest shareholders, are actually also the biggest brokerage houses too. So BlackRock, Vanguard, and Fidelity are actually control more of what might happen inside of Tesla than Elon Musk does. Yeah.
No, that's a very, very good point, and probably a little bit scary, or should be a little bit scary. it's a fascinating space when you, I mean, and I say when you start to understand it. I think I have really still a very surface level of understanding of how it works across, all of this, how it all ties in together. But yeah, I think ultimately, I feel it's important for people to take some ownership and really try to get some level of understanding of their own financial literacy, financial future. And it doesn't mean you won't work with advisors. It just means you probably want to understand what they're telling you, or why, because everybody's situation is different. So it shouldn't be a one uniform solution for all. I think that's probably the real problem, is that it's like we've got this one size fits all solution for retirement, and it really doesn't fit all. So I think that there's a lot to be said for getting a little bit more knowledgeable and granular on how your financial future looks.
And maybe knowing about my types of accounts are one way of doing that. Our customers, the account they have with us is not the only account they have. It's usually a secondary account that works alongside the bulk of the money they might keep in traditional investments at a traditional house, but they recognize that, hey, I've gotten to a certain accumulated asset size, which means that now I need to get more proactive and think about making sure that I have some investments that might zig when the broader market zags, for example. And that people used to be able to do that between stocks and bonds. I don't know if that's actually mathematically the case anymore. They're kind of tracking alongside each other. So people come to these other private or illiquid or alternative investments, for example, in real estate, the field that a lot of your community works in, is something very different, than what happens on Wall Street.
Right. No, exactly. I agree. And I think it is, these self-directed IRAs are probably the only way to get diversified passively. You can go buy your own company, you can go buy your own real estate and get and be a part of it actively, and that will help diversify your assets. But from a passive standpoint, if you don't have a self-directed IRA to go along with that sort of traditional retirement account, then it's very, very hard to get diversified outside of stocks and bonds within that retirement portfolio. So I think that's the turning point, or the focus here in what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just thought that for me, I was someone with a unique background who worked in the retirement space, financial advisory space. I'd spoken to tens of thousands of participants in 401k plans. And I was the guy telling people that put away a dime of every dollar, put it into one of these funds that are broadly diversified with relatively low expenses, and you'll accumulate a certain amount of capital. And I did that for a very long time. And then I thought to myself that actually, when these same individuals start to accumulate a larger and larger amount of capital, then it does actually behoove them to be a little bit more involved and not just, completely rely on things being okay without them ever paying attention and so forth. So you're creating a platform like Rocket Dollar to basically mirror the account opening and the account management experience of what millions of Americans are already used to. Was kind of my thinking and genesis for behind why to do this. And of course, it taps into a market of close to $36 trillion, of which a lot of these private investment, syndicators, issuers, and so forth would love to be able to tap more into. But they'll tell me it's actually inefficient to tap into it. It's hard. We have people that want to do this through an IRA, but the provider they're using isn't easy to work with, and so forth. So that, we thought about it from all these different angles about how to try to make this more ubiquitous. And I think about this, that there's a lot of things that are ubiquitous today, ubiquitous for our children, ubiquitous for younger people, that were completely weird and strange, not even like 20 years ago, right? So like renting a room in someone's house, taking a ride in some stranger's car, like these are all things that not only are normal, they've become like literally verbs. It's a part of our lexicon. And I have this belief that, somewhere down the road, really soon, investing in private, non-registered and alternative investments using an IRA is going to be it's unusual now, and it's going to be very normal soon.
Yeah, I hope so. And yeah, I always, I forget what made me look this up, but I always am reminded on what you just touched on. Like, iPhones came out in 2007. So hasn't even been 20 years, but they're that's like everywhere. And so the things that we now, as you said, like, that are just ubiquitous, and like, I think about it with my kids are young, and I'm like, the things that they will grow up like they know what Amazon is, but they're not old enough to understand that we have to pay for those things, but they're old enough to know, hey, can you just get on Amazon and get this thing? And it's like, well, hold on, they don't just give it to us. It's not a giant charity organization, but it's like, they know, these are the things that are available. They've stayed in, Airbnbs. We talk about, I guess they haven't been in an Uber yet, but they will be. They'll Uber somewhere someday. And so you're
Well, I have a story. I went to New York when my now oldest daughter was younger, so she was around 8. And in New York, it's kind of tough, for someone who's not in New York to be able to look for a certain type of car in an Uber. So it's easier to hail a cab, right? You People still do that today in New York. And I remember my daughter was 8. She's 15 now, and I had to explain to her that she was like, "So why are we waving this car down?" I said, "Well," and I had to explain how a cab works by analogizing it to an Uber. And I remember just thinking, like, this is the weirdest conversation I've ever had, because I'm explaining to a child how a cab works by trying to make it similar, and help her understand it's like an Uber, except instead of using my phone, I use my hand to wave the guy down. And instead of me typing in the address, I have to tell the person the address. And instead of me, like, the phone magically just paying for the ride, I have to, like, actually give the guy cash through this little window. I don't know if it's to protect me or to protect him, probably a little bit of both. But just that, it was like weird. And this was a conversation that quite literally was impossible to happen, like you said, less than 15 or 20 years ago. And they've all changed. So the same things are going to happen with the way we invest. I mean, I'm old enough to remember in financial services that places didn't think that it would ever make sense to allow the individual investor to actually buy and sell their own stocks. Like, that thought was crazy. No one thought about that. I'm also old enough to remember that it would be really weird. No one's going to trust buying anything online by entering their credit card number on the computer. Now, we not only do that, we save it in our phone. So it's even faster to pay for something. These are all things that it didn't exist. And then I'm really going to age myself on this one, because I was just talking about this with the same older daughter now, that I said, the joke was that I used to have to wait until 8 or 9 p.m. at night to be able to call my friends when I was in high school on their first, like, cell phones, because then it was free. But now, you can call anyone you want, but no one does it anyway. They just text.
right. Right. Nobody uses phones to talk on very much anymore. Anyway, it's a
Right. So the idea is that things changed suddenly, and I think that our company's positioned to kind of be in this spot when people start to think to themselves, "Hey, after I've accumulated a certain amount of assets, maybe I should have things that can zig when the market zags, and who knows when that's going to happen." But and do it in a way to where it's mass doable. I mean, at the end of the day, right? iPhone was not the first cell phone, not the first smartphone even, but for some reason, the way that they marketed that product, it just sort of, dominated, and it has the lion's share of the market here, and it's just easily understood and intuitive, and so forth. But, to your community, the way I think about entrepreneurship, it's that combination of maybe being cynical and curious enough to think about, like, could there be a different way to do it? Like, is this the way it's always going to be done? And you'd be surprised, but what people think today are the biggest, smartest companies are all imagining, like, well, it's always going to be done this way. And then it's some upstart who one day is no longer an upstart, and they're the market leader.
Yeah. Perfect example is Blockbuster and Netflix. They just I mean, these are all things that, yeah, I've seen happen in my lifetime, whereas, like, we had no VCR, then there was VCR tapes, then there was, DVDs, then there was now the kids don't know what a DVD. It's like everything's streamed, so it's just kind of that stuff is changing and changing quickly. And you mentioned iPhone was not the first. You don't have to be the first one. You just have to probably be one of the best ones to maintain. But that's a great analogy. Well, Henry, let me switch gears here so I can ask you. And I think you've touched on it some, but I do like to ask every guest, what is your why? Kind of what drives you. You've got obviously a history of innovation and understanding within the financial services world. So what keeps you motivated?
It's funny. I'll be the first to say that financially, I probably would have done better had I just stayed the corporate route. But the why was just, seeing if something could be done, like seeing if you could build a product that made an impact. I really, really enjoyed the thinking behind there's this big thing out there in the world and imagining, like, is there a different way that it could be done? So maybe my why is just being cynical enough to realize that I couldn't have stayed in the same job for 20, 30, 40 years, curious enough to like hopefully come up with some idea that might just actually work, and so forth. But if not, knowing that my worth was enough to go back and do a job that maybe I didn't like, and there's probably a lot of people that do jobs for their entire career that they don't like, but then their purpose and what drives them is something outside of that work, and that's perfectly okay too. That could be family, health, fitness, whatever that may be, the hobby that they like to pursue on the weekend, and their job that they begrudgingly go to just facilitates the ability to pursue that passion or the why outside of work. That's completely fine too. But for me, I think maybe what was driving me was just maybe being curious, cynical enough to understand that I could try, and if it fails, I could probably go back. Could I go back at the same level? Maybe not. And would I have liked it as much? Maybe not. But if I did have to go back and do that, I could probably find another reason, to kind of make life interesting and worthwhile outside of that. That pursuit could be family, health, fitness, some sort of hobby, creating something otherwise. I just think about it myself that, and I use these analogies and these stories when I give a lot of talks publicly, but, J.K. Rowling taught children as a school teacher and wrote books, that became the Harry Potter series on the side. That's what interests her. The job teaching was probably what paid the bills, gave her some structure, stability, and the ability to, have some time off and do the other part. And, that side, that passion made her a billionaire.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think, a number of the examples that you've shared today, I think just really highlight the path through entrepreneurism and success and all of that. Like it's not defined. It doesn't have to be a specific way. It doesn't show up as, I think a lot of times maybe we see on social media, it's like this is the recipe. This is the way you do this. But I think the reality is probably the most successful people followed no recipe. They just followed their passion and worked hard and stuck with it long enough to have something, come out of it. And so I love that. I love that message. I love the idea that, you said knowing your worth, knowing that there will be something, even if the thing you try doesn't work out. So I think that's fantastic. Henry, when people hear this and they want to connect to you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
So on the business side, there's a lot of information at rocketdollar.com. So if people are interested just on the business side, learning more about those accounts, they can go to the website at rocketdollar.com. We are a technology-based company, but we do have phone numbers, and we answer those during business hours for just answering general questions, helping you open an account, and maybe just giving you a little bit of comfort or understanding how the account works. So that number is 855-762-5383. And for people old enough to remember that phone numbers used to correspond to letters. It's 1-855 Rocket D. So if you know how that works, your kids and my kids probably do not.
No, they wouldn't understand, but I do.
Yeah, and then personally, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, Instagram, channels that are most prevalent for me personally. But I'm someone who lives, breathes, and eats these tax advantage retirement accounts. Just doing it in the very traditional incumbent space, and then now trying to fill, I think, what is currently a niche that's about to go mainstream here sooner than people may think, and facilitate the ability to hold private alternative investments inside of tax advantaged accounts. It's already a large part, typically the largest account for American investors, and I think that the purpose of our company is that we just help them achieve that financial freedom by unlocking those funds to go into investments that they otherwise couldn't have done before with the existing providers out there. And that's what we do at Rocket Dollar.
Awesome. Well, we'll get that in the show notes so people can definitely find you and reach out and learn more. Thank you so much for the conversation today. Thanks for being on the show. I really enjoyed it. I think that some of this messaging just around, especially knowing your worth, I think that's so valuable for people to hear. So thank you for coming on the show and sharing everything today, Henry. I really appreciate it.
Seriously, appreciate it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, and folks listening, make sure you connect with Henry. Check out the website, rocketdollar.com. We'll have everything in the show notes. Please like, rate, and review the show so we can continue to get great guests. And as always, thank you very much for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?